A golden crown can hide 1,000 secrets. That poised face in a royal portrait, what battles and desires truly lay behind it. We are about to journey beyond the thrones and scepters into the private obsessions and shocking realities of kings and queens. By the end of this, your understanding of royal history will be turned completely upside down. We will uncover a Roman emperor beloved in the East, a queen who commanded her own warships, and the king whose madness was a terrible physical agony. What is the most surprising truth you believe has been lost to time? Her true power was not in her beauty, but in her command of the sea. Cleopatra VII personally led her Egyptian fleet into the Battle of Actium, a naval engagement that would decide the fate of an empire. This was not a queen who remained safely on shore. She was on her flagship, directing her warships against the Roman navy of Octavian. That popular image of a mere seductress crumbles when you realize she was a polyglot, fluent in at least 9 languages, and a scholar who authored texts on medicine and cosmetics. For centuries, her story was filtered through the venomous propaganda of the Romans who defeated her. They could not conquer her intellect, so they worked to erase it, reducing a brilliant strategist and ruler to a simplistic tale of temptation. What other towering figure has been diminished into a mere caricature by the pens of their enemies? That same brutality could compose a gentle melody. While King Henry VIII is remembered for his 6 wives and his tyrannical reign, a far more harmonious side of him existed. He was an accomplished musician and a gifted composer. In the royal courts, he was known to expertly play the lute, the virginals, and the organ, often spending hours in practice. His most famous composition, a piece called Pastime with Good Company, was a vibrant celebration of music and merriment. It became known as the King's Ballad and was sung throughout his kingdom and across Europe. This song is not a forgotten relic. It is still performed by musicians today, a haunting echo of a king we thought we knew. How do we reconcile the man who wrote such joyful music with the one who signed death warrants with a casual flick of his wrist? This artistic passion was not a mere hobby. It was a core part of his identity, cultivated from a young age in a lavish Renaissance court that valued art and learning. He surrounded himself with musicians, and his own talent was a point of great personal pride. The contrast is jarring. One moment he is penning a beautiful lyric, and the next he is dismantling the religious fabric of a nation. It forces us to see him not as a one-dimensional monster, but as a complex and deeply contradictory human being. His soul contained both the soaring beauty of his music and the chilling darkness of the executioner's block. Yet even the most powerful ruler could not control the story told after their final breath. Catherine II of Russia, known to history as Catherine the Great, fell victim to one of the most persistent and salacious myths in all of royal history. The infamous legend claims she died in a most undignified and physically impossible manner, a story designed to humiliate and mock her memory. The truth, documented by her court physicians and attendants, is far more tragic and ordinary. On a November morning in 1796, the Empress suffered a massive stroke while seated in her privy closet, a small private room adjoining her bedchamber. Her servants found her there, collapsed on the floor. She never regained consciousness and passed away a day later. So how did this straightforward medical tragedy transform into a grotesque fiction? The answer lies in the deep-seated prejudice and political fear she inspired across Europe. As a woman who had seized power in her own right, who ruled with immense intellect and ambition, and who took many lovers openly, she represented everything that threatened the old patriarchal order of the continent. Her enemies, unable to defeat her in life, launched a campaign of character assassination in death. They crafted a vile story that reduced her life's work to a single, crude punchline, a smear that echoed through the centuries precisely because it played upon the biases of the time. It was not a fact but a weapon. This forces us to question every scandalous tale whispered about history's giants. how many other lies have we accepted simply because they make a more entertaining story? The Sword in the Stone is a powerful legend, but the true story of the man who inspired King Arthur is rooted in the gritty reality of a lost Roman province. In the chaotic 5th and 6th centuries, after the Roman legions withdrew from Britain, the island descended into a dark age of invasion and warfare. Saxon armies pushed inland, and the remaining Romano-British citizens desperately needed a leader to unite them. That leader was not a king in a shining castle, but likely a battle-hardened war chief named Ambrosius Aurelianus. He was a Romanized Briton, a man from a noble family who carried the legacy of Roman military discipline into a new and brutal era. Historical accounts from the time, sparse as they are, point to him as the Dux Bellorum, the leader of battles, who won a series of crucial victories against the Saxon invaders. The most famous of these was the Battle of Badon Hill, a triumph so definitive it granted the native Britons a generation of peace. This is the solid historical ground from which the magnificent forest of Arthurian myth later grew. The legendary Excalibur finds its echo in the sturdy spatha, the Roman cavalry sword that a commander like Ambrosius would have carried. His band of loyal warriors slowly transformed over centuries of storytelling into the noble knights of the Round Table. And Camelot itself was not a single castle, but the memory of a lost civilization, the ordered, fortified Roman towns that had once represented safety and law. We are left to wonder how many other legendary heroes began as flesh and blood people, their true lives so extraordinary that they could only be explained through the language of myth. Even the most rigid royal protocol could not contain the heart of a young queen. Victoria was just 20 years old and had already been the sovereign of a vast empire for 3 years when she found herself in a difficult romantic position. She was deeply in love with her cousin, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, but the unyielding rules of the monarchy presented an impossible hurdle. Because she was the reigning queen, no man, not even a prince, was permitted to propose to her. The power and the initiative had to come from the throne itself. So, on a cold October day in 1839, the Queen summoned her courage along with Albert. With her voice trembling with emotion, she asked him if he would enter into a marriage with her. She wrote in her diary that it would have been impossible for her to marry any other man, confessing her intense adoration for his goodness, his sweetness, and his gentle nature. His answer, of course, was a joyful and immediate yes. This was far more than a storybook romance. Albert was not merely a handsome consort. He became the Queen's most trusted advisor, her private secretary, and the absolute center of her emotional world. He was a man of formidable intellect and progressive vision, and he used his position to influence nearly every aspect of Victorian life. He championed the Great Exhibition of 1851, a spectacular celebration of industry and culture from across the globe, showcasing Britain's power and ingenuity. He advocated for educational reforms, the abolition of slavery, and a new sense of moral purpose for the monarchy. His impact was so profound that when he died tragically young, Victoria was plunged into a grief so deep she retreated from public view for years. The woman who had boldly taken charge of her own happiness never fully recovered from the loss of her partner. Their love story, initiated by her proposal, reshaped not just a queen but an entire era. The agony of a king was mistaken for insanity for centuries. While the American colonies were being lost, King George III was fighting a private, excruciating battle within his own body. The violent outbursts, the frantic speech, and the periods of profound confusion that defined his so-called madness were not the products of a broken mind, but the catastrophic symptoms of a devastating physical disease. Modern medical historians have pointed to a hereditary condition called porphyria, a disorder that disrupts the body's ability to produce heme, a crucial component of blood. The results were a cascade of pure torment. The king would be seized by crippling abdominal pain so severe his attendants had to hold him down. His urine turned a deep, alarming purple, a telltale sign of the disease. His skin became painfully sensitive to the touch, and he suffered from debilitating muscle weakness, insomnia, and hallucinations. These were not the irrational fancies of a lunatic, but the neurological fireworks of a body in acute metabolic crisis. To see his suffering through this new lens is to rewrite a tragic chapter in history. He was not a raving tyrant, but a desperately ill man, trapped in a gilded cage of unimaginable pain, while his physicians, baffled and ignorant, subjected him to brutal treatments that only worsened his condition. They bled him, blistered his skin, and strapped him into a restraining chair for hours on end, all in a futile attempt to drive out a madness that was never there. How many other historical figures have been cruelly misjudged, their legacies forever tarnished by a fundamental misunderstanding of the illnesses that plagued them? The portrait of a monster is rarely painted in a single color. While the Roman Senate in the West declared Nero a tyrant and condemned his memory, a very different picture was being celebrated in the cities of the East. There, the emperor was hailed as a liberator and a godlike benefactor. This startling divide began with a grand gesture. During a tour of Greece, Nero made a proclamation that shook the foundations of the ancient world. At the Isthmian Games, he declared all of Greece to be free and autonomous, granting its provinces an unprecedented level of independence from Roman rule and, crucially, exempting them from heavy taxation. To the people of the East, this was not the act of a madman, but of a generous Philhellene, a true lover of Greek culture. They showered him with honors, erecting statues and dedicating festivals in his name. His passion for their arts, his participation in their athletic competitions, even his theatrical performances, which were mocked in Rome, were seen there as a mark of deep respect. So profound was this admiration that when Nero died, a powerful legend refused to let him go. The Nero redivivus myth spread like wildfire, a stubborn belief that the emperor had not truly perished. Many were convinced he had fled to Parthia, the great eastern rival of Rome, and would one day return at the head of an army to reclaim his throne and reward his loyal eastern subjects. For decades, impostors arose claiming to be the resurrected Nero, each finding a willing audience among those who remembered his reign not with terror but with hope. How can one man be both a hated tyrant and a longed-for savior? The answer lies not in the man himself, but in the vastly different worlds he ruled over, and in the simple, enduring truth that a leader's legacy is written by those who felt their power most directly. Even the most brilliant political mind can be forged in the crucible of fear. Wu Zetian's ascent to become the only woman to ever rule China as emperor in her own right was an act of breathtaking audacity. She did not simply inherit a throne, she seized it from a dynasty that had no place for a female sovereign. To understand her reign is to understand a master of both soft power and ruthless intimidation. She cultivated a network of secret police, informants who operated outside the normal channels of law. Their methods were brutal and efficient, designed to root out any whisper of dissent or conspiracy among the old aristocracy that opposed her. A single accusation, often extracted under torture, could lead to the exile or execution of an entire noble family. This system of control created an atmosphere of pure terror in her court, silencing her rivals through a campaign of calculated paranoia. Yet this same ruler, capable of such chilling decisions, was also a brilliant patron of the arts and a devout Buddhist. She strategically promoted the religion far above its rival, Confucianism, which was deeply entrenched with ideas of male superiority. She commissioned grand temples and sponsored the translation of sacred texts, positioning herself as a divine ruler, a universal monarch blessed by the Buddha himself. This was not merely personal faith, it was a political masterstroke. It provided a spiritual justification for her unprecedented rule, framing her power not as a violation of tradition, but as the will of the cosmos. So how do we judge such a figure? Was she a tyrant who clung to power through fear, or a visionary who broke the ultimate glass ceiling centuries before her time? She was likely both. Her story is a stark reminder that in the ruthless game of imperial power, survival often demanded a capacity for both creation and destruction, often in the same breath. Her own cousin wrote secret letters in a code she believed was unbreakable. Mary, Queen of Scots, imprisoned for nearly 2 decades in a series of English manors, was the living, breathing focus of every Catholic plot to overthrow her Protestant cousin, Elizabeth I. From her gilded captivity, Mary wove a web of conspiracy using an intricate cipher, a system of symbols and codes that turned her private letters into an impenetrable secret language. She corresponded with a network of supporters, detailing plans for a Spanish invasion and her own rescue, all under the nose of her jailers. But the very secrecy she relied upon became her undoing. Elizabeth's spymaster, Sir Francis Walsingham, was a master of the dark art of intelligence. His network of agents intercepted Mary's coded letters, and his brilliant codebreaker, Thomas Phelps, sat for days methodically unpicking the complex cipher. He did not just break the code, he understood its rhythm and its flaws, and soon every treasonous word Mary wrote was laid bare before her enemies. The most damning evidence was a letter that explicitly endorsed a plot to assassinate Queen Elizabeth. Once that message was decoded, Mary's fate was sealed. Her own hand, guided by desperation and faith, had provided the written proof needed to condemn her. This was not a simple case of espionage. It was a tragic collision between 2 queens, one on a throne and one in a prison, where the weapon was not a sword, but a carefully crafted alphabet of betrayal. It forces us to wonder how many other fates have been decided not on a battlefield, but on the silent, treacherous ground of a decoded page. A revolution in faith began not with a prophet, but with a pharaoh. In the golden age of ancient Egypt, where 1,000 gods and goddesses presided over every aspect of life, Pharaoh Amenhotep IV committed an act of breathtaking heresy. He declared that all the old gods were false. He shut down the vast and powerful temples of Amun-Ra, stripping their priests of wealth and influence, and he redirected the entire spiritual focus of the kingdom to a single, abstract deity, the Aten, represented simply as the disk of the sun with rays ending in hands. To cement this transformation, he even changed his own name to Akhenaten, meaning effective for the Aten. He abandoned the traditional capital of Thebes and built an entirely new city, Akhetaten, dedicated solely to his one god. This was the world's first recorded experiment with monotheism, a belief in a single, supreme god, and it turned Egyptian society completely upside down. For a brief period, the familiar pantheon of animal-headed deities vanished from official art and worship. The people were told to direct their prayers not to a statue in a dark temple, but to the visible, life-giving sun in the sky. But such a radical shift could not survive its architect. The old priesthoods, their power broken but not forgotten, seethed in the background. The common people, whose daily lives were intertwined with the local gods they had always known, were likely confused and alienated. When Akhenaten died, the backlash was swift and absolute. His name was chiseled off monuments, his city was abandoned to the desert sands, and his immediate successors, including the famous boy King Tutankhamun, worked feverishly to restore the old gods and erase all memory of the Aten heresy. The attempt to wipe Akhenaten from history was so thorough that we only rediscovered his story in the modern era. His grand theological gamble forces a profound question. Was he a visionary prophet millennia ahead of his time, or simply a tyrannical ruler whose personal obsession nearly broke a civilization? His legacy is a ghost in the historical record, a king who dared to challenge the divine order and paid the ultimate price, his name cursed and forgotten for over 3,000 years. Her rage became a fire that nearly consumed a province. Boudica, queen of the Iceni tribe, was a loyal ally of Rome, her kingdom a client state within the vast empire. But when her husband, King Prasutagus, died, Roman law revealed its brutal face. He had willed his kingdom to be shared between his daughters and the Emperor Nero, hoping this would protect his family. Instead, it invited catastrophe. Roman officials stormed into Iceni lands, treating the entire kingdom as conquered territory. They publicly flogged the widowed queen, a humiliating and savage punishment for a sovereign ruler. Then, in an act designed to shatter her lineage and spirit, Roman soldiers raped her two young daughters. This was not merely a political annexation, it was a calculated act of terror meant to break a people by destroying their royal family. But they misjudged their victim. That cruelty forged a rebel queen. Boudica united the Iceni with their longtime rivals, the Trinovantes, harnessing a fury that had been simmering for years under Roman taxation and land seizures. She led a colossal army, tens of thousands strong, on a campaign of utter vengeance. Their first target was Camulodunum, a colonia for retired Roman soldiers. The city was utterly annihilated, its temples burned to the ground, and every man, woman, and child put to the sword. The Roman 9th Legion, marching to relieve the city, was ambushed and massacred, its infantry utterly destroyed. The rebellion swept south to Londinium, a bustling trading port. The Roman governor, Suetonius Paulinus, made a cold calculation. He abandoned the city to save his army. Boudica's forces burned Londinium and then Verulamium to ash, leaving a charred scar across the landscape. Ancient historians wrote that 70,000 Romans and their British allies were slaughtered in these three cities. For a few terrifying months, it seemed the mighty Roman Empire would be driven from Britain entirely. The final, pivotal battle took place at an unknown location, where Suetonius, with his 10,000 professional legionaries, faced Boudica's vast but undisciplined horde. The Romans chose a narrow field with a dense wood at their back, a brilliant tactical move that neutralized the Britons' numerical advantage. The disciplined Roman lines withstood the initial charge, their javelins and short swords carving a bloody path through the tightly packed warriors. It was a massacre. Boudica's rebellion died on that field, and she herself took poison to avoid capture. Yet her story, born from a mother's violated love and a queen's shattered honor, echoes as a timeless testament to the power of righteous fury, a blaze so fierce it almost changed the course of history. A king's crown offered no protection from the shadows in his own mind. King Henry VI of England, a man born to rule, spent 18 years as a prisoner within his own castles, a living pawn in the brutal power struggle we call the Wars of the Roses. His reign was defined by a profound weakness, not of character but of mental stability. He suffered complete mental breakdowns, episodes of a catatonic stupor so deep that he was unaware of his own existence. For months at a time, he would not speak, move, or even respond to his own name. He had to be carried from place to place, fed like an infant, and dressed by his attendants. In one of these fragile states, his own son was born, and it was said the king had to be shown the baby to comprehend he had an heir. This vulnerability made him a magnet for ambitious nobles. The kingdom descended into civil war, a bloody tug of war between the rival houses of Lancaster and York. During these conflicts, Henry was captured, rescued, and captured again. He was shuffled between strongholds, a silent, broken figure while armies fought and died in his name. For nearly 2 decades, he was less a monarch and more a symbol, his physical possession a key to legitimizing whichever faction held him. His final imprisonment was in the Tower of London, the very fortress that symbolized royal power. It was there, in May of 1471, that this gentle, pious king was almost certainly murdered, ending a life that was more tragedy than reign. His story forces us to look beyond the glory of the throne and see the profound human cost of inherited power, a reminder that the greatest battles are sometimes not for a crown, but for the mind that must wear it. Her story proves that a crown is never truly secure when it rests on the head of an ungrateful man. In the sprawling, incense-filled palaces of 11th century Constantinople, Empress Zoe Porphyrogenita was the last surviving member of the mighty Macedonian dynasty. Born into the imperial purple, she was a princess born in the special porphyry-lined chamber reserved for reigning emperors, and she had already been married to 2 elderly emperors in succession. By the time she was in her 50s, she was a powerful but lonely figure, the sole legitimate source of imperial authority. Then a handsome young man named Michael entered the picture. He was the nephew of her late husband and decades her junior, and he quickly became not just her lover but her chosen instrument. With Zoe's unwavering support, she married Michael and orchestrated his coronation as the co-emperor Michael V. She had placed him on the throne, believing his loyalty was absolute, but Michael had ambitions of his own, untainted by gratitude. Once he felt his power was firm, he made a catastrophic miscalculation. He accused his elderly benefactor of plotting against him and forcibly tonsured her, shaving her head and sending her to a remote convent. He believed that exiling the empress would allow him to rule alone, but he had profoundly misjudged the people of Constantinople. To them, Zoe was not just an empress, she was the living embodiment of the empire itself, a direct link to the glorious dynasty that had ruled for nearly 2 centuries. The city erupted in a fury of righteous rebellion. For 2 days, mobs surged through the streets, demanding Zoe's restoration and chanting her name. They stormed the palace gates, and Michael, terrified, was forced to flee, eventually being captured, blinded, and sent to a monastery to live out his days in darkness. Zoe was brought back in triumph, her head covered in a regal veil, and placed back on the throne alongside her sister Theodora. This was not merely the restoration of a monarch, it was the power of popular will defending the very idea of legitimacy. Michael's reign lasted a mere 4 months, a fleeting chapter of betrayal completely undone by the one thing he failed to understand, that the true power in Byzantium did not always reside with the man who wore the crown, but often with the woman whose blood had given it to him. Even the Sun King, an absolute monarch whose every move was public spectacle, conducted his most intimate affairs behind a veil of absolute secrecy. After the death of his queen, Maria Theresa, Louis XIV of France did not remarry publicly. Instead, he entered into a private, morganatic marriage with his longtime companion, François d'Aubigné, the Marquise de Maintenon. A morganatic marriage was a union between people of unequal social rank where the lesser-born spouse and any children from the marriage could not inherit the higher-born partner's titles or privileges. For Louis, this was the perfect arrangement. It allowed him to have a wife and companion without elevating a French noblewoman and her family to a position of dangerous power, and it prevented the creation of new royal heirs who could destabilize the succession already secured through his son and grandson. The ceremony itself was shrouded in such mystery that historians still debate the exact date and location, though it is widely believed to have taken place sometime in late 1683 or early 1684, performed by the king's own chaplain in the private chambers of the palace. No official record of the marriage was ever kept, a testament to the king's absolute control over his own narrative, yet Madame de Maintenon's influence was anything but secret. As the king's unofficial wife, she became his most trusted confidante. Her apartments were the true nerve center of the court, where policy was discussed and favors were granted. A deeply devout woman, she is widely credited with steering the king's conscience in his later years, encouraging a new era of piety and austerity that replaced the reckless extravagance of his youth. Her influence is most starkly visible in one of the king's most disastrous decisions, the revocation of the Edict of Nantes in 1685. This act, which stripped France's Protestant Huguenots of their rights and unleashed a wave of violent persecution, bore the clear imprint of her rigid Catholic beliefs and her desire to create a religiously unified kingdom. So we are left with a profound historical contradiction. The woman who was never officially queen may have wielded more direct personal power over the aging Sun King than any of his ministers or official mistresses. Her story is a ghost in the palace of Versailles, a whispered truth that challenges everything we assume about the visibility of royal power. proving that sometimes the most influential figures in history are the ones who operated just outside the spotlight. A king's desperate bid for freedom ended in the most undignified of places. James I of Scotland was a ruler determined to tame the wild and powerful noble families that had turned his kingdom into a collection of private fiefdoms. He had spent his reign imposing new laws and taxes, stripping away their ancient privileges to build a stronger, more centralized Scottish crown. This made him many bitter enemies among the aristocracy, men who saw their influence waning with every royal decree. In February of 1437, the king was residing at the Blackfriars Monastery in Perth. It was a place meant for reflection, but it became the stage for a brutal conspiracy. A group of nobles, led by Sir Robert Graham, stormed the monastic quarters. They were not there to negotiate, they were there for murder. Hearing the commotion and knowing his life was in peril, King James made a frantic decision. He pried up a floorboard in his chamber, revealing a hidden drain that led to the underground sewer network running beneath the monastery. It was a narrow, foul passage, his only hope for escape. But as he crawled through the darkness, a terrible realization struck him. Just days before, he had ordered the other end of that very drain to be blocked up to prevent his tennis balls from rolling into it and being lost. His own fastidiousness had trapped him. The conspirators found the open floorboard and with torches held high clambered into the tunnel. They caught the king there in the muck and the gloom and stabbed him to death. His reign, built on the idea of bringing order from chaos, ended in the most chaotic and degrading manner imaginable. This was not just a political assassination, it was a symbolic execution, a deliberate act of humiliation against a king who dared to challenge the old order. It forces a chilling question: how many other grand ambitions have been undone not by a grand army, but by a single, overlooked detail? She shattered the ultimate glass ceiling by refusing to be seen as a woman at all. Hatshepsut was not content to be a mere queen regent, a placeholder ruling for her young stepson Thutmose III. After a few years of steering the kingdom from behind the throne, she made an unprecedented and audacious move. She declared herself the Pharaoh of Egypt, a full king in her own right. To cement this transformation, she reinvented her very image. In statues and reliefs, she was depicted with the broad, bare chest of a man, wearing the traditional pharaoh's kilt and the iconic striped Nemes headcloth. Most strikingly, she adopted the ceremonial false beard, the ultimate symbol of masculine royal authority. This was not an attempt to deceive her people, but a brilliant piece of political theater. She was communicating that the spirit of kingship, the divine power of the ruler, was genderless. Her reign was not a quiet one. She launched a legendary trading expedition to the distant, fabled land of Punt, a place rich in incense, gold, and exotic animals. Her envoys returned with a treasure trove that stunned Egypt, including living myrrh trees to be planted in the gardens of her magnificent mortuary temple. And that temple, built into the cliffs at Deir el-Bahari, stands as her most defiant legacy. It is a breathtaking complex of terraces, colonnades, and ramps that seems to grow directly from the rock face, a masterpiece of ancient architecture designed to proclaim her power for all eternity. She filled it with inscriptions justifying her rule, claiming the god Amun-Ra himself had chosen her to be king. For over 2 decades, she ruled a prosperous and peaceful Egypt, one of its most successful monarchs. Yet after her death, a campaign began to systematically erase her from history. Her stepson Thutmose III, now ruling alone, ordered her statues to be smashed, her cartouches chiseled off walls, and her obelisks walled up. Why would he try to destroy the memory of such a prosperous reign? Was it lingering resentment, a desire to secure his own son's succession by removing the precedent of a female king, or simply an attempt to restore the traditional male order of things? The answer is lost to time, but her story forces us to confront a profound question. How many other revolutionary leaders have been so thoroughly scrubbed from the record, their triumphs vanishing simply because they dared to break a mold that was never meant to be broken. His story is a stark lesson in the brutal arithmetic of conquest. The last sovereign Inca emperor, Atahualpa, found himself the prisoner of a small band of Spanish conquistadors led by Francisco Pizarro. To secure his freedom, he made a legendary offer, one that has echoed through the centuries. He promised to fill a large room measuring about 22 feet long and 17 feet wide, once with gold and twice with silver, as high as a man could reach. This was not a mere pile of treasure, it was a king's ransom on an unimaginable scale, a testament to the vast wealth of the Inca Empire. For months, a river of precious objects flowed into the Spanish stronghold at Cajamarca. Porters carried in flawless golden statues, intricate ceremonial vessels, and dazzling sheets of metal stripped from the temples of the sun. The room slowly filled with the physical manifestation of a civilization's artistic and spiritual genius. Yet when the ransom was nearly complete, the Spanish revealed their true objective was never gold but total control. They put Atahualpa on a sham trial, convicting him of treason and other fabricated crimes, and sentenced him to death by burning. In a final act of betrayal, they offered him a merciless choice: to be burned alive as a pagan or to be strangled after accepting a last-minute baptism. He chose the latter, and with his death, the organized resistance of the Inca Empire was effectively broken. The conquistadors then proceeded to melt down the entire ransom, every sacred artifact and masterpiece of craftsmanship, into plain, transportable gold bars. An entire cultural heritage was liquidated into bullion, its history and meaning vaporized in the crucible. This forces us to ask a haunting question: what is the true cost of a promise made to those who have no intention of keeping their word? The forest offered no protection from a stray arrow. King William II of England, known as William Rufus for his red-faced complexion, was a monarch whose reign was marked by clashes with the church and a harsh temperament. His death in the New Forest in the year 1100 was officially recorded as a tragic hunting mishap, a simple case of a royal party chasing deer and a single, fateful arrow going astray. But the details of that day point to something far more sinister. The king was shot by a nobleman named Walter Tyle, an expert marksman who supposedly missed his target and struck the king instead. Immediately after the fatal shot, instead of facing justice or even staying to explain, Tyle spurred his horse and fled to France with astonishing speed. The king's body was left abandoned in the woods, discovered by a local charcoal burner, while the most powerful men in the kingdom, including the king's own younger brother Henry, rode off in different directions. Henry did not pause to mourn. He raced directly to Winchester to seize the royal treasury, and then to London to have himself crowned king, all within a matter of days. This was not the behavior of a grieving sibling, but of a man executing a prearranged plan. The New Forest itself was a place of bitter contention, a royal hunting ground created by their father, William the Conqueror, who had evicted entire villages to make room for his sport. The local populace saw it as a place of tyranny, and many believed the family was cursed for its creation. Was William Rufus the victim of bad luck, or was he eliminated by a conspiracy of nobles who found his rule intolerable, with his ambitious brother waiting in the wings to reap the benefits? The official story feels too neat, too convenient, the pieces falling into place with a suspicious ease that has echoed through the centuries as one of history's most perfect and unproven crimes. The woman who outlived Henry VIII did so not just through political cunning, but through the power of the written word. While history often remembers Catherine Parr as the wife who survived, her true legacy was forged in ink. She was the first English queen to publish a book under her own name, a profound collection of prayers and spiritual reflections that became a surprise bestseller. This was not a quiet hobby conducted in a secluded palace chamber. It was a bold and public act of faith and intellect, Her book, Prayers or Meditations, was written in English, making its ideas accessible to the common people, not just the Latin-speaking elite. It offered a deeply personal and Protestant-focused guide to devotion, encouraging individuals to seek a direct relationship with God. The work resonated so powerfully that it went through nearly 20 editions after its initial publication in 1545, a testament to its widespread influence. Catherine used her unique position to champion the cause of the English Reformation, promoting the translation of scriptures and supporting other Protestant writers and thinkers. She even engaged in theological debates with the king himself, a breathtakingly risky move that once nearly led to her arrest for heresy. Her survival was not merely luck, it was a testament to her diplomatic skill and her ability to navigate the treacherous currents of the Tudor court. How many other women of that era wielded such influence from behind the throne, their intellectual contributions quietly shaping the religious and cultural fabric of a nation? Catherine Parr's story reframes the survivor queen as a revolutionary author, a woman whose pen was as powerful as her crown. His quest for eternal life led to one of history's most terrifying tombs. The first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang, unified a warring collection of states into a single empire, but his greatest fear was the one enemy he could not conquer, death itself. He became consumed with finding an elixir of immortality, sending expeditions across his domain to locate mythical islands of immortal beings and demanding his alchemists brew potions to grant him eternal life. This profound paranoia forged his most enduring legacy, not a potion, but a city of the dead. His tomb complex was designed as a microcosm of his entire empire, a subterranean kingdom where he could rule forever. And to protect his eternal reign, he needed an eternal army. This was the true purpose of the now famous Terracotta Army, the thousands of life-sized, uniquely detailed soldiers, chariots, and horses buried in pits near his mausoleum. They were not a grand artistic statement, they were a functional garrison created to defend their emperor from any spiritual threats in the afterlife. Yet this army was merely the outer perimeter of his defensive scheme. Ancient writings by the historian Sima Qian describe the interior of the main burial mound itself in fantastical, chilling detail. The tomb is said to contain a scale model of his kingdom, with palaces and towers, and a landscape crafted from precious materials. Flowing through this underground world were rivers and lakes of shimmering, liquid mercury, representing the great rivers of China. Modern scientific surveys have detected exceptionally high concentrations of mercury in the soil around the unexcavated mound, lending startling credibility to a story that sounded like myth for 2,000 years. But the final defense was the most ruthless. Sima Qian wrote that the tomb was rigged with crossbows set to automatically fire at anyone who dared to break in. This was not merely a security system, it was a death trap designed to slaughter any tomb robbers, a final, violent act of control from beyond the grave. The central tomb remains sealed to this day, a decision rooted in both reverence and profound caution. Archaeologists fear that an excavation could damage priceless artifacts and, more alarmingly, potentially release deadly levels of mercury vapor into the environment. So the emperor rests, surrounded by his mercury rivers and silent, mechanical guards, his paranoid dream of an eternal, impenetrable kingdom finally fulfilled. He sought immortality through potions, but he achieved it through terror, his legacy forever locked within a poisoned, booby-trapped hill. A mother's love has its limits, especially when her son threatens to burn down the entire empire. Sultan Ibrahim I of the Ottoman Empire earned his grim nickname, Ibrahim the Mad, through a reign of pure, unhinged terror. His mind, perhaps broken by the long confinement of the royal cage, the caves where Ottoman princes were imprisoned to prevent rebellion, unleashed a whirlwind of bizarre and brutal acts. He developed a fetish for furs, covering the palace walls in sable and demanding his entire court wear them even in the sweltering summer heat. His whims were deadly. He once became obsessed with the size of a courtier's wife and had her seized for his harem, only to have her drowned when she complained. In his most chilling moment of madness, he threw his own infant son into a cold, empty palace cistern over a perceived slight, an act from which the child was miraculously rescued by servants. The empire was teetering on the brink, its treasury looted for his pleasures and its leadership paralyzed by fear. The one person who could not look away was his own mother, the formidable Kursum Sultan. She had once been the most powerful woman in the empire, a regent who ruled with shrewd intelligence. She watched as the dynasty she had dedicated her life to preserving was being systematically destroyed by the son she had placed on the throne. The unthinkable became the necessary. This Queen Mother made a secret, heartbreaking pact with the leaders of the Janissary Corps, the empire's elite military force. Together, they conspired to end the Sultan's life. In August of 1648, Janissaries entered the royal apartments, found Ibrahim, and strangled him with a silk cord. His own mother had sanctioned the regicide to save the Ottoman state from its own sovereign. Her desperate act forces a haunting question. What is the greater duty of a parent who also wears a crown, to protect their child, or to protect the millions of subjects that child is meant to serve? A king's solemn face became a national mystery. For over 40 years, King Zahir Shah of Afghanistan ruled with a public demeanor of profound sadness, earning him the poignant nickname, the King Who Never Smiled. This was not a reflection of a cold or unfeeling heart, but the weight of a crown forged in personal tragedy and immense national pressure. He ascended the throne in 1933 after his own father, King Nadir Shah, was assassinated right before his eyes, a traumatic event that cast a permanent shadow over his reign. From that moment, the young king inherited a fractured and deeply tribal nation, and his life's work became the nearly impossible task of dragging it into the modern world without tearing it apart. His solemnity was the mask of a man constantly balancing on a knife's edge. He pushed for progressive reforms, establishing a parliament, introducing a new constitution, and championing education for women, allowing them to attend university and enter the workforce. He poured resources into modern infrastructure, building roads and power plants to connect his ancient kingdom. Yet every step forward risked alienating the powerful conservative and tribal factions that formed the bedrock of Afghan society. His public face, forever serious and reserved, was a carefully crafted tool of statecraft. In a culture where leaders are expected to project dignity and gravity, his unsmiling countenance communicated stability, patience, and an unwavering focus on his monumental task. He was not a king of grand celebrations, but of quiet, determined progress, and his legendary sadness was perhaps the most honest reflection of the agonizing burden he carried, the immense cost of trying to gently steer a centuries-old civilization into a new era. How heavy must a crown feel when every smile could be misinterpreted by someone, and every frown could signal a nation's despair? The very name of the Queen of Sheba evokes a kingdom paved with gold, a legend that has tantalized explorers for millennia. Her visit to King Solomon, laden with unprecedented treasures of gold, spices, and precious stones, is one of the Bible's most iconic meetings. But where did such staggering wealth originate? The answer appears to lie not in a mythical treasury, but in a network of real and now lost gold mines. Ancient traditions, particularly strong in Ethiopia, insist the queen's true name was Megda and that her powerful kingdom of Aksum was the source of this fabled gold. For centuries, Ethiopian emperors traced their lineage directly back to the union of Solomon and Sheba, and the gold that adorned their churches was said to come from the same ancient veins that funded her legendary journey. Across the Red Sea, however, modern Yemen also stakes a claim, with archaeological evidence pointing to the Kingdom of Saba as a major trading power that controlled the incense and spice routes. Could the Queen of Sheba's gold have come from there, acquired through trade rather than mining? The most compelling physical evidence lies in the dusty plains of Zimbabwe. Great Zimbabwe, a sprawling stone city that thrived between the 11th and 15th centuries, was the heart of a powerful gold trading empire. Its rulers, sometimes called the monomatopa, controlled vast gold workings, and their wealth was so immense that early Portuguese explorers, upon seeing the ruins, were convinced they had found the biblical mines of Solomon and Sheba. While the timelines do not match the biblical queen's era, this confusion reveals a powerful truth. The legend of a fabulously wealthy African queen and her gold mines was so potent that for centuries, any discovery of ancient African gold was immediately attributed to her. So were the mines a single, secret location, or were they a metaphor for the entire gold-rich region of ancient Africa? The legend endures precisely because it is anchored in a tangible reality. The earth there does hold gold, and ancient civilizations did extract it on a spectacular scale. The Queen of Sheba's lost mine is likely not one single tunnel waiting to be discovered, but the collective, romanticized memory of a continent's golden age, a glittering ghost that continues to whisper from the depths of the earth. Even a dethroned king could find a new crown in the lawless freedom of the sea. After losing his Danish throne in the late 1430s, King Eric of the Kalmar Union refused to fade quietly into exile. Stripped of his royal title and power, he was given the island of Gotland as a prison, a gilded cage meant to contain his ambitions. But Eric saw not a prison but a pirate's nest. From the walled city of Visby, this former sovereign of 3 Nordic kingdoms launched a second, startling career as a privateer, or more accurately, a pirate king. He used his remaining ships and loyal followers to prey on merchant vessels crossing the Baltic Sea, capturing their cargoes and holding their crews for ransom. This was not a clandestine operation. It was a brazen campaign of maritime banditry conducted by a man who had once worn a crown. The sheer audacity of a former monarch turning to piracy sent shockwaves through the powerful Hanseatic League, the commercial confederation that dominated Baltic trade. They were outraged that the man they had helped to depose was now disrupting the very commerce that was their lifeblood. Eric's actions forced his successor, his nephew Christopher of Bavaria, into an almost farcical position. The new king of Denmark had to publicly condemn and make war upon his own uncle, the pirate king of Gotland, in order to protect the kingdom's fragile peace and economic interests. This bizarre chapter forces us to reconsider the very nature of power in the Middle Ages. A crown was not a permanent guarantee of authority, but a temporary loan from fickle nobles and wealthy merchants. When that loan was called in, a king could find himself with nothing but a sword and a ship, his royal birth granting him no more privilege than any other sea rover, and perhaps even making him a more tantalizing target. What does it say about a society when the ultimate fall from grace for a king is not quiet contemplation, but a life of crime on the high seas? His boundless curiosity crossed into a chilling disregard for human life. Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II, a man hailed in his own time as the wonder of the world, possessed an intellect so vast it devoured every subject from philosophy and law to medicine and zoology. But this insatiable hunger for knowledge had a dark and ruthless shadow. He was obsessed with discovering the fundamental truths of human nature, and he designed grotesque experiments to strip away all nurture, all learning to see what remained. In one of his most infamous inquiries, he ordered a group of infants to be raised by mute foster mothers and nurses. These women could feed and bathe the children, but they were forbidden to speak a single word to them, or to coo, or to sing. Frederick wanted to discover what language the children would speak naturally, believing it would be the original, God-given tongue of humanity, perhaps Hebrew or Greek. The experiment yielded no divine language, only a profound and terrible silence. The infants, deprived of the essential human connection of sound and affection, simply died. They could not survive without the loving interaction that is as vital as food or water. In another act of cold-blooded science, he sealed a man inside a wine barrel, determined to prove that the soul departed the body at the moment of death, leaving behind an empty vessel. He had the man watched carefully until he suffocated, and as the last breath left his body, Frederick ordered the barrel opened immediately to see if a spirit could be seen escaping. He observed nothing, of course, and took this as proof of his theory that the soul was mortal. These were not the acts of a simple tyrant, but of a mind that saw human beings as fascinating puzzles to be solved, their lives and suffering a negligible cost for the prize of ultimate understanding. He dissected the human experience with the same detached precision his court scholars used to dissect corpses. This forces us to confront a deeply unsettling question: where is the line between genius and monstrosity? Can a mind be both brilliantly enlightened and morally vacant, using the tools of science not to heal or to help, but to satisfy a cold, philosophical whim? Frederick II sought the secrets of life and death, but his legacy is a permanent stain on the history of human curiosity, a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge without a moral compass can lead not to enlightenment, but into the darkest corners of the human soul. From personal tragedies and secret passions to scientific obsessions and stolen thrones, we have journeyed through the private lives of kings and queens. These 25 glimpses reveal a truth far more compelling than any fairy tale. The legendary figures we place on pedestals were, in the end, profoundly human. They experienced devastating heartbreak, composed beautiful music, harbored bizarre fears, and made desperate choices under impossible pressure. Their stories are not just a collection of dates and battles, but a mosaic of human experience painted on a grand and often brutal canvas. They remind us that history is not a simple story of good kings and bad queens, but a complex web of ambition, love, genius, and sheer survival. The next time you see a stern face in a royal portrait, remember the person behind the crown, a person who likely held secrets more incredible than any fiction. What is the most surprising royal fact that changed your perspective? Share your favorite historical mystery in the comments below, and subscribe to keep unraveling the secrets the history books left out.